So welcome to the Data Plus Women US Northeast. We were formerly the Data Plus Women New England, but we're Data Plus Women US Northeast now. Thank you, Krishma, for creating our new logo. So basically what we wanted to do in this session is we wanted to go over, and I should say, lead our leadership team. We have a new leader, Ria Mehta. Karishma and Krishma are my other co-leads for the Data Plus Women US Northeast. And the recording will be shared in the DataFem YouTube channel as well as my YouTube channel, Tech Tips Girl. And we have some advisory, Preeti and Maduri and Noel. So basically what we wanted to do in this session is we wanted to give Tableau developers tips and tricks and kind of go through a couple of things of best practices for visual analytics. I have Kate Crawford on the line. She's my co-presenter for this session. This is actually a redo session that we did. Was it April 1st for JP Morgan Chase? So wanted to share it with you all out there. So I'm Dawn Harrington. I'm a lead software engineer, and like that, I have a blog site, techtipsgirl.com. I'm also a Tableau visionary as of this year and a Tableau social ambassador. So Kate, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Crawford. I'm a Tableau and Alteryx consultant here at the Information Lab based in New York. You all may be familiar, probably if you've looked for Tableau help or you've come across the data school. So I'm currently in that program and done their training, and now I'm working alongside Dawn, helping JPMC's Tableau support group. So I'm excited to share some tips that we've shared with our team as well.
So we'll go through some visual best practices today. We'll talk about some design principles, and we'll give you tips on enhancing performance, and we'll talk about collaboration in Tableau. So going into best practices for visual analysis, you may have seen something like this for the software development lifecycle where you have planning, defining, designing, that whole thing. So the first part of your best practice is to gather requirements. And I would like to say, please ask the kitchen sink of questions. I have referred to ChatGPT to just say, hey, what are the requirement questions that a developer should ask? And ChatGPT surprised me with all of the questions that you should ask. Because you never want to get to, that endpoint where you've already created the dashboard, you're meeting your clients, and there's no responses. You're getting like crickets in the background, like they're not asking you, they're not engaged. So chances are you might have missed a question in the very beginning of the process. So the second part I would say is know your data. And there's some tips that you could do is I would say, like what I do is I kind of, if it's a data source I'm not used to, is I'll try to pivot it and kind of like explore the data using Tableau desktop and just to try to get to know those kinds of things. Wireframing is also a good thing to do. This isn't something I did when I first started being a developer. And wireframing is essentially planning out the dashboard before you even start Tableau development. And we're going to go over like some examples of wireframing too here. And you can attach an example wireframe like to your requirements documentation and kind of use it as a contract, like we agreed upon this, and then attach it to those documents. Because in wireframing, you could also do chart selection. You could talk about the charts that you're going to do and what charts are good for what analysis, like where can you go to find out that information. We'll talk about that. Then you have performance testing. Test what you put out there, test your charts. Like, are they working as they expected? Is anything slow? And then, deploying it from, your environment. So there's a help link on this page. Kate, do you want to add anything for this slide?
This is where I would just harp in on knowing your data. We'll talk in detail about a lot of these topics, but You could probably spend an entire session on knowing your data, but I'll just highlight that as well.
Okay. So first part is we're going to get into design principles. So Tableau has a really good article out there in help.tableau.com. It talks about why visual analytics. So we as human beings are we process data faster with visualizations than looking at a table of data. So pre-attentive attributes are what allow us to visually process information. So if you look at this chart taken from that Tableau article, there's 10 pre-attentive attributes that you can kind of call out and bring your user's attention to a specific chart, that kind of thing. So we can draw our user's eyes with length. You know, you can see that bar is like longer than the other 5 bars. Color hue is one that is used a lot. You know, your eye is drawn immediately to that red dot in color hue. So you can use color effectively to draw attention to specific parts of a dashboard. Color intensity is also one. So these are all, you know, size, shape, orientation, all of these can be in your developer toolbox to kind of help users and guide them around a dashboard. Kate, do you have anything to add about pre-attentive attributes?
Not here, but I think on the next slide, we'll talk more in depth.
So I found this online with Mr. Vautier's. You know, he does some training. He is a coach with Tableau, and I kind of recreated it in Excel. So there's different kinds of dashboards. One size does not fit all, or one dashboard isn't better than another. It's all about what your clients need. And I really liked this chart because it talks about different attributes of what report. And so let's look at, you know, like storytelling friendly, you know, like that's an attribute of a dashboard. It's rated low for like your standard or your standard report, or think of like your Excel report. But a standard report or an Excel report might be, you know, moderate and high for like other features, such as, you know, are they economical? Or, you know, is there, you know, ease of use? You know, a lot of people may be used to using like an Excel sheet. So we're not saying that one report's going to be better than another. There may be use cases for different kinds. So just wanting to go over the different types of reports. Like, do you need a exploratory dashboard where you're guiding your user from the top and using top-down design, like from the top part down to another part? You need multiple dashboards in one workbook. Like maybe a best practice for your users is to have one dashboard that has a high-level overview, like lots of KPIs, but then you guide them to a secondary dashboard that gets more granular with the data, that has more of a table view, so that they can, you know, drill down and filter. So what type of report do you need? You know, there's this kind of chart. So go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, and I think Tableau has the capability to create a lot of these types of report designs, but obviously it shines with those exploratory dashboards, creating a suite, maybe even those analytics reports you might be familiar with, especially on Tableau Public. But I would love to dive into our next topic as well, which is related to how are we actually going to lay out this design. So we've chosen the design and what type of report we would like to create. Tableau has actually done some research on how the human eye receives and processes the information that is laid out on a dashboard. So what you're seeing here in this image is from their eye tracking study. So if you notice at the very top, we have a lot of KPIs, so big aggregated numbers, which the eye is drawn to first. So we're not seeing a lot of tables in this view, and instead we have also the use of color. So having a really meaningful color usage, you may see some of those red dots peeking through and those blue and green hues as well. And then in addition to that, we have chart titles. So if you dug deeper into this dashboard layout, and there's a link for the eye tracking study if you wanted to check out the full view that they created, you'll notice that they have chart titles as well as subtitles. As subtitles are a great way to help guide your viewer through the data story that you've laid out on the dashboard. And finally, there is white space that is added. It's a very small but impactful decision that you can have, is to widen and the space in between your charts and the different sections of your dashboard with a bit of padding. That again helps with that guiding through the dashboard. And I see, Sunita, you said you can't see the entire dashboard. This image is more just for you to see how the eye is capturing within the first few seconds of viewing the dashboard. So just to exemplify that, the way that you lay out your dashboard, the first contact that your user will have. But if you're interested in seeing the full dashboard that they used in the study, again, it's in that link at the bottom of the page, or if you just search eye tracking study Tableau, you should be able to find it pretty easily. And with this knowledge of how the human eye is processing this information, we can really dive into how we can plan to deliver this information in the most optimal way. And the way that we plan is with wireframing. So with wireframing, we have a few steps that we can take to really implement the best dashboard layout. And it starts first with gathering inspiration. We interact with dashboards all the time. So you may want to pull from what's already working in the real world into your own creation. And then after that, you can move on to thinking not just about the broader reception and layouts of dashboards, but you can think about the specific use case for your users. And the way we do that is with a user story, which I'll talk about in an example that I'll have in a moment. But user stories are essentially taking those requirements that we gathered at the beginning of the development process and then really defining how this dashboard will meet those requirements. After that, we can start deciding which charts are best to tell the story that we've now created. And we can choose that based on obviously our ability to develop, but also on having communications with our users about what's the best method for them to gain insights as well. And then finally, once we have those charts selected, we can lay out those charts. And this is where the wireframing becomes very important, because you're able to see what kind of fits, how can I have a left to right story that's being told, or do I want a top-down story? All of these things can kind of be configured in a very flexible way when we're wireframing rather than having to build multiple iterations. And then finally, if you are looking to do a little bit more of an advanced build, maybe you're building that exploratory dashboard, we can start adding annotations and interactivity at the planning stage on the wireframe. So you can start planning out and figuring out, okay, this chart interacts with this chart here, and my control panel is going to impact these certain sections of my chart. So you can start designing and figuring out how interactivity will work for you. And I think Dawn has an example of a wireframe that she's built before.
So this is a very simple one that I use PowerPoint. You know, everybody might have access to a PowerPoint, and I just use text boxes to kind of put them in. And the beauty of using PowerPoint is that you can put text right in there, but you can go and use other tools. You know, like some people use Figma. I know there's a couple of other, you know, examples out there. Kate, I'll let you talk about this one that you use.
Yeah, similar, just as Dawn had said, she used PowerPoint. Here I have an example of using Excalidraw, a beloved program for planning and wireframing, just because it has some of those key features. Obviously, you could wireframe with just a pen and paper or a whiteboard. I've done that plenty of times. But sometimes when you're collaborating with people, so you're working on a team, and we'll talk about collaboration soon. But when you're collaborating with people, you really want to have a central space. So here I was working with a team. We defined that user story that you see in that purple box. And when I think of a user story, I often kind of use a certain layout for that, or a template where I say, as a type of user, I want to do something that I can then gain some insight. So that's what that piece of text is. And then all of my collaborators, we actually started building the charts in Tableau, and then just shared images. So a program like Excalibur or Figma, you can easily upload images and share them with the people you're working with. And then those lines, they look quite chaotic, but this is what I had talked about in that step 5 of wireframing. Those are annotations for our interactivity plans. So each color has a certain type of interaction. I think the orange was filters and the red was set actions or something like that. And we also annotated them so you know exactly what it's doing. So yeah, that's kind of an explanation. So you don't just build this all at once, but it's something that's gradual that you all plan out together.
Yeah, I love that you use this to kind of collaborate with others, because sometimes, you know, like that's what you miss with, you know, planning things. It's like, do you have the collaboration with your clients, or do you have the collaboration with other developers? So all great points. So the next part we want to talk about is performance. So have you created a dashboard that is super slow? Like it looks great, you know, but when you see it on the server, it doesn't function as well as it did in desktop. So what are some tips and tricks for performance?
Yeah, as you said, Dawn, that first step that you realize that you need to address performance is often that question, like, why is this dashboard so slow? And Tableau, again, has done a lot of research and shared that research, particularly in a white paper called Designing Efficient Workbooks. It's definitely worth the read. And in that, it's broken down in essentially 3 sections and in an order of where you'll see the most impact on optimizing your performance. So starting with that question, is the workbook slower? And you can determine, is it slower on server or on desktop? So especially if you're an enterprise user, you can start thinking about, okay, how is my data connection being established? How is it being effectively rendered? And so you may consider, do I want a live or an extract? And if I use that extract, what type of schedule am I going to use? Am I going to use a full refresh or an incremental refresh? So these are all questions that are broken down and defined in detail in the Designing Efficient Workbooks white paper. And then they move on and they say to now scope down and look at the actual workbook. So maybe you've figured out your data connection and you still want to see some more performance improvements. And so that's where you can step in and optimize your workbook. And we'll talk about this shortly, but running a performance analysis is the best way to find the slowest views. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this. And then finally, you'll step down one more time and can look even more at a granular level and say, okay, I've looked at the data connection, I've looked at the workbook. How about let's take a look at some of these calculations. And if you're familiar with programming languages like SQL or something else where you kind of have an understanding of data structures and algorithms, then you know there are certain functions that are more performant than others. And I think Dawn has some great tips in relation to data structures soon. But just so you know, it kind of goes from the server and data connections to workbooks down to calculations in terms of where can I see the largest impact when it comes to performance improvements.
Thank you, Kate. So I broke out performance tips in 3 different areas. The first one is data connections. So the first one, you know, like I would say, sometimes you might have excess columns in a data source because you're thinking, I don't have it for this visualization, but I might use it someday in the future. So remove those columns. If you're not using them now, just remove them. Even if you think you might use them someday. You're going to enhance performance with your data by just getting rid of those columns that you don't need. Another tip I would say is use extracts, not live data sources. A lot of people that connect to Excel, workbooks especially, they don't realize about the Excel feature that Excel opens a satellite file whenever you are in Excel. So it stores your credentials. So have you ever tried to get into an Excel workbook and it says locked by user? You know, it's because of that satellite file that's opened with Excel. So use an extract so that way you don't have that locking problem. Because a lot of workbooks on the server might be connected to an Excel file live, and then someone else tries to get in that file, it says it's locked, or the opposite happens. Someone is in that file and Tableau is trying to connect to it and it won't be able to because of that whole satellite credentials file. There's an good article by Gordon Rose that I provided too. And all of these tips are found in that help.tableau article about performance tips. So the next one I would say is data blends. I have seen some dashboards where a person is blending data to like 6 different data sources, and you're like, oh boy. Blends are not great for performance. A lot of us might take it out of Tableau because you're adding all of these ETL functions behind the visualization layer. So, so I want to say it's like extract, transform, and load. Some of us use, either Tableau Prep or like Alteryx to clean our data, because data is never clean. Do all our things that we need to clean up data, get rid of nulls, add zeros instead, those kinds of things. So the more columns and relationships, the longer it's going to take to render if you have data blend. So just keep that in mind for performance with data connections. Last is table joins. Will the join explode the row or column count? Be mindful when you're joining multiple tables. Some people don't have, like a join column, like a primary join, and they'll do like a full outer join, and that creates what's called a Cartesian join, when you're adding everything to everything. So, you got 5 rows with 5 rows, it's 5 times 5 for all of the possible combinations that you could possibly have. So be mindful with table joins. Do you have anything to add about data connections with performance tips, Kate?
I think you covered a lot of them. I think my rule for data blends, though, is I only use 2 sources. One, and then I connect another. That's my limit often.
Two, not 4 or 5 or 6.
Maybe 3, maybe. And if it's to a third, it's a very small data set.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The next performance tip section is calculated fields. So you may not be aware of this, but numeric formulas process faster than string formulas. And I put the order here. I try to think of mnemonic, but it didn't work. So it goes Boolean is fastest, then integer, then float, then date time, then string. So that's kind of how they process in the order of like which is the fastest, which is not so fast. So keep that in mind when you're doing calculated fields. Are you using an average formula? Well, there's a way to use min or max functions that can produce the same result, and they'll reduce processing speed. So that's something else to kind of think of, because average is scanning and giving you an average with a table. Level of detail expressions, they can be the more granular a level of detail expression is, if you're versed in level of detail expressions, fixed, before that semicolon, do you have like 3 different things that you're going, using depending on your fixed, include or exclude expression. So they can take up processing time. So that's the tip for calculated fields. Anything to add, Kate?
With those LODs, when I first started training for Tableau, I would often be told anything that's an LOD can probably be a table calc. And if you've been using Tableau for a while, you know that LODs were a new feature, not so new anymore. But if you can figure out in a table calc, it might be more performant that way.
Yep, I agree. The last performance tip, I would say, other methods is delete unused worksheets and data sources. You aren't using it, it's taking up space on the server. Think about that. Use fixed dashboard sizes. I see some beginner users use auto size because they might have clients that have small monitors, and they might have a client that have very large monitors. So it's going to try to adjust. So it'll cause the dashboard to be less efficient. Use a fixed dashboard size, and test your browser capabilities. So use it on Edge, use it on Chrome, and delete unused layouts such as the phone view. I think some people always forget to do this, and I know I've forgotten to do it when I'm publishing Tableau Public dashboards, and I'm looking at my dashboard later on my phone, and I'm like, whoops, I forgot to delete that phone layout because I'm not using it. So they also take up space. So all of these things take up space on the server.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anything to add, Kate?
No, I think we can start talking about ways that we can, or methods and tools that Tableau has created for us to optimize workbooks. So some of these tips are actually available to you from within Tableau Desktop while you're developing. If you may be familiar with the Workbook Optimizer, upon publishing, you often have that little bottom section that says, View Optimizer. But you can also access it from going to the server tab and just running the optimizer there. And that image you see, there's like 3 sections. The red is kind of like those high alerts to take action. These are often scenarios, say you're connected to you have a live connection to a database. And maybe it's a very large table that you're connecting to. It may recommend that you extract it so that it can improve performance that way. You have that yellow warning. It just needs a bit of review. So these recommendations are often dealing with calculations. So you might see that LOD tip that Dawn shared might pop up here as, evaluate that, or there's some conditional logic with a lot of nested statements. So that might be alerted in that section. But you also can feel really good about your development practice if you've got a lot of good, all passed and ready to go green check marks there. And you can even use that drop down and just see, what have I done right? What am I doing well with this workbook? So that's always a good feeling I like to have when I'm publishing and use the optimizer.
And if you want to find more information out on the Workbook Optimizer, we did include the help.tableau.com article, or you could just, Google Workbook Optimizer. It's new and some newer versions, that are out there. I think it's like 2023 plus is when it started bringing in the Workbook Optimizer.
Yeah. And then if you want to have a little bit of a deeper dive into workbook optimization, we can discuss a little bit about performance recording. If you are familiar with Excel, it's a very similar function. It's a little bit more, I would consider this more an advanced method for optimization. But Tableau's performance recorder is actually built directly into the application. I think it's the next slide, Dawn. And so you can kind of see what it actually looks like. So Tableau generates a completely different workbook based on data that it's recorded from the dashboard that you built. So it's often recommended build your dashboard to completion, test it on server, and then this is that next step down. Maybe you have noticed you have a lot of slowness still in the workbook on desktop, and you can actually open the help and then settings and performance, and then start the performance recording. And ideally, you'll keep the file. I often keep like a sheet of paper to remember which actions I've taken so far. And then that could be anything from like loading the dashboard view, clicking on every dashboard that you've built, clicking through every filter action, and then testing every other action that's exploratory. And then next, you can return to the help menu so that you can stop the recording. And then finally, that new file will open automatically. And you'll notice here, it's pretty granular. So that designing efficient workbooks has a much more detail on how you can read these performance recording workbooks. But you'll notice the top one is that geocoding. I know, Dawn, you have a good tip about when you're using spatial data.
Oh, just that, if you're using a map, you always want to ask yourself, does it help the analysis? Because geocoding is geospatial, columns are larger in file size, and if they're not helping, it takes that rendering up that's on the server. So if it doesn't help the analysis, don't use it. That's my tip. Any maps that you use, they will take up a little bit of rendering. So just ask yourself that question.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. And then next, beyond optimization, we can start thinking about how we collaborate. It's all about sharing, and I think this is one of my favorite things to talk about. At the Information Lab, we do a lot of client projects and we do a lot of collaboration. And some of the most important things that we've done is decide on how can we collaborate in Tableau. It's not like another, maybe like Google Suite, where you have live collaboration tools. So we really have to design our workflows around Tableau's resources. And the first thing that we do is that we share those resources. And exactly that, I often say that it's best just to extract your data. So you'll extract your data so that you can then connect your workbooks. Because in this scenario, and I'll talk about this in a moment, you'll have multiple people working in multiple workbooks, and all of them need to be connected to the same data source. So there is no confusion about calculations or the data model. And that's kind of my next tip, is that we want to actually build your data model in your data source. So maybe you all start off with a call together and you open up Tableau Desktop, and next you want to create some calculations and then build the data model out as you see in that image, because you can actually save the data model and the calculations all within one data source, published data source. So some people don't know that, but if you build everything in Desktop, you can publish it together and you won't have any confusions there. Let's see. And then after you kind of figure out your resource sharing, you can move on to starting to think about your design and how we'll share our designs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Sorry about that.
But so when you're sharing your designs, there's a couple different ways that we can do this now. If you click next, I think the first thing is to choose your fonts and colors. So on the right, I actually have the way that I started sharing my fonts and colors with my team. And it was through a grid. I would define all of the color use cases. And I actually linked the article for dashboard templates for teams that I had wrote a few months back. And but at Tableau conference, you all might have seen that custom themes was recently released in Tableau Desktop 2025. So you might want to update, because you can actually export and import your custom theme. So I've linked on the presentation as well to the actual presentation from TC25. But I think it's a great feature, and it gives you the ability to maybe designate one person. So you guys have built the data model. Now you can figure out your design template and then have that person export their theme, and you can all import and have a pretty smooth transition. And if you're on an older version of Desktop, if you click next, you'll see that I've said that you need to build or like share your sample template. So this may even apply. Maybe you still use the custom themes, but you actually build and share a template that I've defined in that article book that I linked below. And then if you click next again, you'll notice that a big piece of being able to create an actual template, maybe with an entire layout. So you've given that person, 4 chart spaces and a control panel, and then you allow them actual sheet swaps. So you make a mock sheet, maybe with a Superstore data set that everyone has on their desktop application, and then they can swap the sheets in and out when they start to build their own analysis. And if you click next, we'll talk about the last piece of sharing in this collaboration space, and that is to designate tasks. So there are some responsibilities in Tableau that really should be done just by one person on your team. But we kind of collaborate first on creating a combined workbook. So oftentimes the final workbook, we can easily just copy and paste our dashboards. If you go into the bottom section of your Tableau desktop, you right-click on the dashboard tab, copy, and then you open up that combined workbook and paste. You can save and then publish that workbook up, and then someone else can bring it back down, copy, paste their dashboard in, and do that process until everyone's work is combined. And of course, you can then start designating tasks. So maybe after everyone has pasted in their dashboard, you can have one person refine the design. So maybe it's the same person who helped design that original template or theme. So now they're coming in and saying, okay, let's make sure everyone's fonts are correct and everything is aligned, everyone's using the correct padding space. And then after that, you may appoint someone to do the actual publishing of the combined workbook to server or cloud, whichever version you're publishing to. And then after that, you'll have someone else who says, okay, well, those published data sources that we were sharing before, they need to be put on a refresh schedule. They can make sure that the connection is working properly, and they can run a few tests to make sure that the data can stay fresh. And then finally, you may have someone use Tableau Pulse. Now with Tableau Pulse metrics, again, this is a full session that you could spend on this, but oftentimes you create one metric first and then other people can build off of that metric. So sometimes it's easier just to designate an individual person or multiple people to focus on a single metric. So these are some tasks that we can share. But I think while you're in that process of development, you may be thinking, okay, so where am I supposed to store? Do I want to store it in the same location as the rest of the project where we'll be pushing the combined workbook? And you actually don't have to, because on Tableau Cloud, you have the option to use a personal space. You'll notice personal space is that little head. It's like a profile image on the left side. And you can click there and see all of the workbooks published here. So upon publishing in Tableau Desktop, it's actually the very first folder option that you'll see there. So you can publish up here and ask your administrator to turn it on if you don't see it, or increase your space if you need a lot more space for your personal space. Let's see how many times I can say space here, but it's a great place for your just to save your progress before you start sharing with the rest of your team and before that combined workbooks phase. So yeah, I think the last part, I think I'll let Dawn more about.
So what makes you a better developer? So what I would recommend is follow developers or, ambassadors out there. So in Tableau Public, you can follow people. And I would encourage everyone to create a Tableau Public profile if you haven't, because you can favorite things. Tableau Public has lots of dashboards created by lots of people. And, maybe you'll come across one that's like really cool and it's something that you might want to download if you can and figure out how to recreate it. Or, maybe it's something you want to mock your own internal like dashboard after. So I would say do that step first. Join a Tableau user group session like you all have done today. There are lots of external Tableau user groups in different industries, in product belonging. Lots of, you can click the different tabs in, if you just Google Tableau user groups. And they have them all the time. So you don't know what you can learn from one of these sessions. And it's a great place to network with other users like you. The last thing that I would say to do is participate in a community challenge. This is what I've done. I've participated with a Makeover Monday. Makeover Monday is when they find a chart that maybe Google or like some news article has posted and they want to make it better. So they give it a makeover in Tableau. They try to recreate the original and then make it over. What would be a better chart for that chart that was posted in that article? Workout Wednesday is also great to join because they give you a challenge, and you always learn something new. Like you learn a way of like building something new in Tableau. Like, can you have a table that expands and collapses? And then there's Back to Viz Basics, which I'm not too familiar with. I'll let you talk about Back to Viz Basics.
Yeah, when I first started in Tableau, this is where I started. So it really helps you understand the foundation of Tableau and how Tableau works. Because every week I think it starts with a line or a bar chart, and you can build up all the way through, dual axes charts and Sankey's. So it's a great way for you to get weekly practice, and you not only learn how the chart is structured in Tableau, but it also has a lot of good real world examples. So like, when is this chart actually best used? So help you with that chart selection process that we talked about at the very beginning. And it's also just a good refresher. Maybe you're already kind of very familiar. You've been building dashboards for a few years in Tableau. It's a great way to kind of keep your skills really fresh. So.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today. We will hang tight if anybody has any questions. I'm going to start bringing you all in. If you want to, join us and if you have any questions for us about, any of the presentation that we had today. So I will open it up if there's any questions in the chat room or anything like that. Thank you for joining us today. Is
Yes.
the recording going to be available? Absolutely. It will be available in my blog channel. I'm Tech Tips Girl on YouTube. Like, follow me. I have a couple of short video clips on how to do things. It will also be in the DataFam chat room in YouTube. So,
It looks like Sunita, you have a question about Tableau features. Ask away.
hi, we can
Hi.
hear you.
Okay. So I have Tableau report and then I want to export that in Excel file. Is there any way that I can have that file with title? Whenever I export that in Excel file, the title will not come. So if you have any like suggestion, like how do I do it? Like any ideas on that?
And you're asking, can I ask again, you said the Excel file, the title? Can I ask
Yeah,
what?
when I export a worksheet on my Excel, like cross tab and then do an Excel like want that
Oh,
data, then my title won't appear there. Like I missed the title of that report.
yeah. So the way that that's controlled is actually the what you name the sheet. So when you export and use that cross tab download
Hmm.
button, you're actually downloading the sheet name. So very similar to an Excel file, you'd want to name your sheet name what you would want that sheet to be downloaded as. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I don't see like when I work on the worksheet and there is a high title and title right on the top.
Mhm.
So if I name that and then name like a worksheet name Sunita, and then I want that title on top of that file,
Mhm.
and then export that with that title.
So
Um,
that's yeah. So that's not the functionality. The functionality would be you have to
Whatever
name
we named.
the sheet name.
Okay.
So just because you change the title, the sheet name is an active separate
Mm-hmm.
object from the title. So just because
Okay.
you're changing the title of the chart doesn't mean that you're changing
Mm-hmm.
the sheet name.
Okay. And one more thing, sorry. So if I want to show all the rows, I use index, right? Index in calculator field and use index. And then I don't see that. If I hide that index, then it will show all the rows and it will not show in the worksheet or desktop. But
Mhm.
when I export that, it shows up in my Excel as an index column.
Mhm.
So how do I get rid of that in Excel?
If it's when you create a calculation, that calculation is going to be in the final table.
Mm-hmm.
So for it not to be seen, you could potentially use an LOD calculation.
Okay.
Because LODs aren't stored, um, they're an aggregation and a single value. So maybe using an LOD that way, but there's a few caveats there with which function you use with inside an LOD. But I would say maybe try an LOD.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it will show all the rows, right? Like if you have like one row, you have some sub, then
Mhm.
even I want to see, let's say in one column, Sunita, and then the second column, I have five, six categories, and I want to see Sunita on all
Mhm.
the rows. I use index, but if I do LOD functions, then it will work that way.
It would depend on how you
Okay.
configure it. Yeah, I think maybe I'll be able to find an article on this to share with
So
you.
yeah, Tableau isn't a great tool for, like, you know what I mean, like a file
Mm-hmm.
extraction. You know what I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like a file repository is the word I'm looking
Right.
for.
Yeah.
Tableau is meant more for like visual analytics because like it takes you
Mm-hmm.
longer to like look at Excel file with all of these rows, repivot
Mm-hmm.
it for this summary, repivot for that summary, repivot for this. But we realize there's clients that just want a data dump.
Mm-hmm.
So like I might have clients where I just spew them out an Excel file from Alteryx and
Mhm.
just email it to them. You know what I mean? Because like they're used to
Mm-hmm.
the raw data. It's all about you know, like I would say control and change. You know what I mean? Like some people want to have that raw data and like, cause it's what they're used to.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, like there's a whole study on like, you know, visual analytics. Well, you can't look at Excel data and see how it's trending over time. Like a line chart's gonna show you
Uh-huh.
that data. So
Uh-huh.
there is specific use cases for like certain kinds of things. So I would ask your clients, how are they using the data? Like you need the Excel dump, but what questions are you answering? Like, is there something that we can get you that answer quicker than you having to repivot that data and narrow it down and like do all those things? So that's what I would do. I would take it as an opportunity to like ask your clients like, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing with this data that you're exporting like, you know, every single time? Like, is there an enhancement that I could add to this that you could maybe just export this as a PDF or a PowerPoint for, you know, to answer your questions so you could have it in a meeting or something like that. So that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
I linked an article for sorting fields, and there's so many. If you search data school and then sort in Tableau, you'll be able to find even more. But I really like Lay's
Okay.
instructions there, so you can kind of
Okay.
see how sorting can be done if it's a little bit more custom.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? I provided some links there. The Team Data Fam. It's not just our like recording. It's all of the Tableau user groups. So you know, if you missed a you know session with like Andy Cotgreave or something from like the Tableau Analytics Hub or something like that, it's going to be in that Data Fam channel. So a lot of different links there. Any other questions that you might have for us?
Elaine?
Hi. Hello. Hi, Kate. Hi, Dawn. I'm Elaine. This is my first time joining a Tableau user group sync. This was very helpful, but I do have a few questions more along with the collaboration piece. So I think you guys in your presentation talked about, you know, removing unused data source. For context, I support a team that really focuses on like self-service. So pretty much my role is to make data and dashboards shareable to them. But basically what I'm finding is that my stakeholders, sometimes there are data sets that they will want to just build visuals from, but they're not accessing them quite frequently. I'm wondering if you guys have any like recommendations around how I can categorize it so I can like free up like space and performance on Tableau server, and maybe like a system where I can kind of organize the data and still make it usable to the team, but like these are data sources that they might just access on an ad hoc basis, and I want to make sure it's there for them when they need it.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm gonna follow up with a question. Those data sets or these self-service analysts, are they using are they building from a single data source? And when they build from these data sources, is it from the same table that they're making these requests, or are these requests coming from multiple different tables? So they're kind of it's not as central. It can't be centralized in a single table.
Typically, they're coming from one singular table, but I do have a couple of blends, which makes it like tougher for somebody without Tableau experience to go and inquiry from. But typically, when I do most of the pipelining, I make it available on one singular table, which then gets pushed up to Tableau server, and then they'll just go in and query for what they need. It's just that some of the data sources they're not accessing frequently, so I'll get notifications saying that, hey, the extra refresh will not refresh, but I'm trying to balance between, you know, if they really need it at a later point on for an ad hoc analysis, how do I make sure they have what they need?
What I would recommend is that maybe the best structure we can model after how Tableau does it. So if anyone's familiar with Tableau Cloud, they have the Admin Insights folder, and it's available to all users. So in this case, it would be your project available to all your users. And the way that they structure it is they have very large tables. So rather than creating all of the workbooks for the end user, what they've done is they have kind of like a starter workbook So maybe you consider reformatting your project so that it uploads all of the tables that are most commonly recommended, and then you can take in requests to bring in larger tables. And then you can create starter workbooks for that do have example blends. So even just today, I had someone ask about admin insights, and I was able to very quickly walk them through, this is how these two tables join. This is the ID that they connect on, so that you're able to also have that ability to show people, okay, this is feasible, or this is performant, and this is not. So again, that project would look like a lot of large tables stored and on extract schedules. You create starter workbooks, and then you allow those individuals either to create views from those starter workbooks or create their own workbooks, and tell them to hide columns and create a different model. Or of course, you could go in and create another starter workbook where you've hidden the columns based on what they need. So I think that might be the optimal solution here and help you manage those requests a little bit easier without having to query the database for a bunch of tables a bunch of times.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. I see Tamara asked a question and asking, in your experience, can any LOD calc be done as a table calc, or are there instances that do not work? That's a very good question.
Yeah. So I would use LOD. Okay, Adrian answered it. Yeah, go Adrian.
Yeah, we'll read Adrian's response for everyone. So short answer, yes, but it depends on the case. Just keep in mind, LOD will be fixed for specific dimensions and table calculations. Will compute along those dimensions, depending on the order. So if you have a case or example, he's asked you to share, but usually they're amazing guys on the forums. This is very true, which can help you really fast. And I will also plug again, in our presentation, we talked about Workout Wednesdays. One of my colleagues, Erica, she's one of the leaders for Workout Wednesdays, and that is her main thing. She always tries to provide a table calc solution. So if you are interested in what I mean when I say that LODs versus table calcs and seeing them in parallel, Workout Wednesdays have a lot of good examples there. Roshni also added that relationships can also be a good alternative to both LODs and table calcs. Pushing the data processing to the database and the data source is a lot more efficient than having Tableau do it within its own network. So all things. Dawn, you'd want to add something?
Oh, no, like I used LOD expressions for like a 30-40 30 split of a population. So like there's specific use cases that like you could probably do it in a table calc, but like for that specific use case, like I only found like LOD expressions, but that was just me. That was that one use case, or 70 split of a population to get that information. But I would agree with Adrian. It depends. I think it depends. Be a button for Tableau. It depends on your use case. So, great point. Thank you, Roshni. Thank you, Adrian.
I'm going to also plug another article because it has Tableau's order of operations, which also may help the situation. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all run into an order of operations issue at some point where you're like, why isn't it giving me the number? Like, I know the number is like, so always refer back to the order of operations and like walk that through. Like, okay, wait, I have a context filter here, but you know, so like walk yourself through it. Yeah, so thanks for the plug, Kate. Any other, don't start with the idea of using LODs. Yeah, I would say that is true. Thank you, Adrian. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you everybody for joining and listening to our session on best practices, and look out for that recording in the Data Fam. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks for joining, everyone.